Hello, friends, and welcome. My name is Bonnie Schmidt, and I'm so glad that you are here. I am a Neurosciences Master Trainer, and NEAR stands for Neuroscience, Epigenetics, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and Resilience. And I'm really honored to be here today as your host for this training on the Introduction to the Adverse Childhood Experience study. So all of the information and the slides that you will see and hear today come from a program called ACE Interface, which is the program where I received my training. So I'm really excited to get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. All right, so here I've just added my email. So I just want to let you know that if you have any questions about this presentation or anything about the neurosciences, please feel free to reach out and ask. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I also just want to say a heartfelt thank you to the Clallam Resilience Project and to Kitsap Strong for all of the work that they are doing to bring more resilience to each of their communities. So what if the largest public health discoveries of our time are actually about the smallest of us? And as we look at the effects of toxic stress on the population as a whole, the field of epidemiology is where we will turn. So epidemiologists are scientists who study the origins of disease, disability, productivity, and health in a population. And they really help us to focus our efforts on issues and processes that will make the most difference for the well-being of everyone. So we're going to talk about a large epidemiological study and about the enduring effects of adverse childhood experiences. And Dr. Robert Anda and Dr. Vincent Felitti are the co-principal investigators of the study, which they call the ACE study. So during the latter part of the 20th century, we learned a great deal about risk factors for the major causes of disability, disease, and premature death. From hand washing to cancer screening, public health campaigns became way more prominent, and there were national education programs that raised awareness about the many health risks due to cigarette smoking. I'm sure that many of you remember this. A massive campaign was launched to teach the public about HIV transmission. I'm sure many of you remember that as well. These are all things many of us remember, and although those campaigns are effective, they don't work well for everyone. So let's take the example of cigarettes, right? So despite knowledge of the health risks, many smokers never quit, while others attempt to quit but fail. And why is it that they're unable to break this habit? Why do they start in the first place? So during the late 1980s, Dr. Robert Anda was an internist and epidemiologist working at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. And his colleagues showed that people who were depressed were more likely to smoke. So when smokers were followed up for more than 10 years, those who were depressed were less likely to quit. So they were curious as to why this was. And at that time, people were talking about self-medication as a way to understand behaviors like smoking, excessive drinking, and drug use and abuse. And the concept is that the use of psychoactive drugs or behaviors that can affect emotion are more common in people who struggle with depression and anxiety. In the case of depression and it's linked to smoking, it became apparent that the nicotine in tobacco smoke was the likely explanation. And that's because nicotine can reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety. So the benefits of nicotine in reducing these unpleasant emotions might really help to explain why knowledge of health risks due to smoking aren't quite enough for some people to quit. So shortly after publishing these studies, Dr. Anda met Dr. Vincent Felitti, who is the director of the Department of Preventative Medicine at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. And Dr. Felitti visited the CDC to present his finding that related childhood sexual abuse to morbid obesity in women. And Dr. Felitti believed that obesity was an understandable response to this form of childhood trauma because of the potential soothing effects of eating and because morbid obesity could be a defense against unwanted sexual advances. So something clicked between Doctors Anda and Felitti, and they started asking the question, could could it be possible that childhood adversity is the origin of later risk factors for major diseases and disability? Is that what's actually happening? And they reviewed the literature on the effects of child abuse and realized it was time to really broaden the scientific scope to include a broader public health perspective on the effects of child abuse and related adverse experiences. So, scientific research begins with some type of hypothesis, right? An educated guess about what will be found. And the ACE pyramid here represents the hypothesis that Dr. Andes and Felitti were testing with their public health study. So, when they developed this hypothesis, the leading edge thinking at the time was about how risk factors lead to disease and early death. So, just the top three layers of this pyramid. But Dr. Andes and Felitti knew that something must be missing, and they could see this because the risks are not random. They're concentrated in some populations and not others. And people who have one risk tend to have others. So that is the cluster. So they decided to test their hypothesis that multiple forms of childhood adversity could be a major determinant of health. So the top 6 levels of this pyramid. So the ACE study hypothesis concept is that ACEs lead to impaired neurodevelopment, which in turn lead to social, emotional, and cognitive adaptations that can then lead to the risk factors for major causes of disability, disease, and social problems, and then lead to early death. The ACE pyramid is a life course model from conception to death that is designed to understand how adverse childhood experiences influence human development in predictable ways. And that bit is really important because what is predictable is preventable. What is predictable is preventable. So you'll notice on this pyramid that there are another 2 layers on the bottom, right, that have been added to the pyramid since the beginning of this work by Dr. Anna and Dr. Felitti in the 1990s. And that's because there is a growing body of research that indicates that trauma may have roots in family histories or local socioeconomic conditions and can be passed through genetics to their offspring. So most prior studies of the health and social effects of childhood abuse focused on a single type of adversity, such as sexual abuse. And the ACE study really looked at broadening the picture to include multiple types of childhood stressors. In addition, the study measured a wide array of health and social problems. So this is how the ACE study expanded the knowledge into a broader public health perspective. So the ACE study is really unique because it provides the potential to understand how multiple forms of childhood stressors can affect many important public health problems. So design of the ACE study began in 1991. In 1994, the CDC provided funding to conduct the ACE study at the Department of Preventive Medicine in San Diego. So more than 17,000 adult members of the Kaiser Health Insurance Plan completed a survey about adverse childhood experiences, health behaviors, disease risks and disease, mental health, substance abuse, and other health and social problems. And their ages ranged from 19 to 94 years. And study participants were generally well educated. Most had attended college, and only 6% did not have a high school diploma, as compared with 13% of the US population who did not. They were predominantly white, middle-class people who had access to some of the best healthcare in the world. So study participants are still being followed to assess the relationship of ACEs to causes of death, incidence of diseases, healthcare utilization, use of prescription medications, and other things. So as we move forward in the presentation, just consider how these types of results might look in some of our more marginalized populations. So this slide shows the 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences that were studied at that time. The first group are indicators of household dysfunction, which include growing up with substance abusing household members, alcohol or drugs, parental separation or divorce, growing up with mentally ill household members or caregivers, witnessing intimate partner violence, specifically having a battered mother, or criminal behavior as evidenced by having a household member that was imprisoned. 3 forms of child abuse were studied: emotional, physical, and sexual. And 2 forms of neglect were also included: emotional and physical. And as you can see from the percentages on the slide, ACEs are truly common in this middle class population. So, because adverse childhood experiences are so highly interrelated, it did not make sense to look at how single categories of the ACEs influenced health and social problems. So instead, what doctors Anda and Felitti did was they developed an ACE score. And this score is simply a count of the number of categories of ACEs that each person reported from 0 to 10. So each category counts as 1 point in the ACE score. So if a person experienced physical abuse, no matter how many times or what the severity of the abuse, the ACE score is 1. If the person experienced physical abuse and had a substance abusing parent, the ACE score is 2, and so forth. So think of the ACE score as a measure of the childhood biologic stress dose. And as the ACE score goes up, on average, the exposure to the developmental effects of toxic stress increases. So in this illustration, you see that only 1/3 of the people in the study had an ACE score of 0. 16% had scores of 4 or more. Adverse childhood experiences are common and they tend to cluster, and ACEs are a hidden burden in the study population. So people who report higher ACE scores are more likely to have health and social problems. In fact, as the ACE score goes up, the percentage of people with health and social problems also goes up. So we call this a dose-response relationship. You know dose response in the realm of your car and vehicle, right? The more gas you put into your car, the more miles you can drive. In this case, where there is a higher dose of adverse childhood experiences, the higher percent of people with health problems. So all of the data slides from the ACE study that I'll show you today are formatted in the same way. So along the bottom horizontal axis are the ACE scores, and from 0 on the left to 4 or more on the right. The vertical axis is the percent of people who have the disease or condition. So in this first set of bars on the left, we see that the percent of people who became regular cigarette smokers by age 12 goes up as each level of the ACE score goes up. In the second set of bars, we see the percent who were smokers as adults also goes up in a stepwise fashion as the score goes from 0 to 4 or more ACEs. And people with higher ACE scores have an increased risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. About 4% of people with an ACE score of 0 developed COPD, while more than double that percent of people, around 9% with an ACE score of 4 or more, developed COPD. So ACEs lead to early onset of smoking, which is sustained throughout adulthood and eventually leads to a high risk of smoking-related lung disease as well. So let's stop here for a moment. Why would 12-year-olds be more likely to smoke if they have higher ACE scores? What does it really feel like to be a 12-year-old with a high ACE score? The effects of ACEs on the developing brain leads to a higher likelihood of feeling depressed and anxious or having difficulty concentrating. Turns out that nicotine, which is efficiently delivered through inhaling cigarette smoke, can reduce anxiety, feelings of depression, and can improve concentration. So is it any wonder that kids with high ACE scores are more likely to smoke? For them, smoking may simply be self-medication with a non-prescription drug. Similarly, injecting IV drugs can be a way to cope with the feelings and circumstances that are a consequence of higher and higher ACE exposure on brain structure and function. So this concept of adaptive behaviors, even those with no negative consequences in the face of the effects of ACEs, leads us to the idea of trauma-informed care. And this idea changes the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, what are the experiences of your life, and then how can we support you? So this way of asking people about problems related to ACEs really works to reduce blame and shame and just leads to an overall more compassionate and kind interaction. So depression is the leading cause of disability in developed countries. Here we see that the risk of depression increases for both men and women in a dose response fashion as the ACE score goes up. ACEs are held in the body, leading to mental, physical, behavioral health problems in adulthood. And some of those problems are unintentionally handed to the next generation. So becoming a person with alcohol dependence, marrying a person with alcohol dependence, and suffering from depression are a part of the intergenerational transmission of adverse childhood experiences. One of the strongest relationships seen in the ACE study is between ACEs and the risk of suicide attempts. People with an ACE score of 4 have almost 20 times the risk of suicide attempts as people with an ACE score of 0. So this is a slide of our local data, and it was collected from the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, which is the nation's premier system of health-related telephone surveys that collect state data about US residents regarding their health-related risk behaviors, chronic health conditions, and use of preventative services. So here in Clallam County, between 34 and 51% of people reported having at least 3 adverse childhood experiences in their lifetime. This is a slide of our Washington state data. And here's a list of some of the health and social problems that were documented by the ACE study publications. Because ACEs have a powerful impact on many health and social problems, the ACE researchers concluded that ACEs are the leading cause of health and social problems in our nation. And this should lead to everyone thinking about prevention. We are living in a time with stunning potential for shifting the trajectory of health and well-being for generations to come. ACEs are common. ACEs are highly interrelated. ACEs have a cumulative impact that is captured by the ACE score. And people with higher ACE scores are more likely to have multiple health and social problems, some of which increase the odds of their children having high ACE scores. The discoveries about the effects of toxic stress on the developing brain provide biologic plausibility for the ACE study findings. So this information makes a very strong case for concluding that the relationship between the ACE score and health problems is a cause and effect relationship. So how do we put all this together to make a case for understanding adverse childhood experiences as a powerful pathway to health and well-being? So now we understand that ACEs are common and have a strong cumulative impact on the risk of common health and social problems. Preventing ACEs then and their intergenerational transmission is the greatest opportunity we have for improving the well-being of human populations. In fact, the ACE study team and ACE interface believe that this is the greatest opportunity of our time and perhaps of all time. So this slide shows the percentage of various health and social problems that epidemiologists estimate are caused by ACEs. The calculation that is commonly used to do this in public health studies is called population attributable risk. And this is displayed as a percentage as an oil spill on this slide, right? So the percentage of a problem coded by the oil spill represents the percentage of each problem that is potentially preventable by preventing ACEs. So I'm going to say that again. The percentage of a problem here coded by the oil spill, represents the percentage of each problem that is potentially preventable by preventing ACEs. And these percentages are quite large. In fact, the high percentages on this chart are rarely seen in public health studies. So the cumulative effects of adverse childhood experiences reflect a powerful opportunity for prevention, no matter if you are working to prevent heart disease or cancer or end homelessness or hopelessness or improve business profitability. As we align a portion of our work and around this common goal of preventing the accumulation of ACEs and moderating their effects, we reduce all of these problems and many others all at the same time. The ACE study provides us with straightforward information about the consequences of toxic stress during childhood. This scientific research gives us powerful information we can use every single day to improve health, safety, prosperity, and longevity. But the ACE study isn't a detailed roadmap of services or programs. It's an invitation for us to be pioneers, as this is an adaptive challenge. This news is simply too important to wait for someone else to design a detailed roadmap. Through our collective knowledge and action, we are the ones with the power to shift the dynamics within our own families, communities, and society that lead to high ACE scores. So thank you so much for being here with me today and for listening. If you have any questions, please reach out and contact us at www.clallamresilienceproject.org. I hope that this finds you well and that you are having a beautiful day. Thank you again. Bye-bye.